I knew there had been 14,000 books written about Lincoln, but I just had hopefully the courage to think that somewhere, if I spend enough time, I'll come up with a fresh angle. So when I started, I thought I would write about Abe and Mary's relationship. And I began to see, as I was reading about Lincoln's day-to-day activities, that he was spending even more time with the members of his cabinet than he was with Mary.
Thunder forth, God of war.
And then when I realized they had all kept diaries, they had all written hundreds of letters to their wives, then I knew that this is the story I wanted to tell, especially because they had been his rivals for the Republican nomination. So it allowed me to show him through their eyes in a way that hadn't been used quite the same way before.
Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln by Doris Kearns Goodwin. Part 1, Thesis. This book illustrates how Lincoln forged a team of his rivals to transform the presidency, preserve America, and free it from the chains of slavery. By detailing not only Lincoln's life, but the biographies of his competitors, William Henry Seward, Salmon Chase, and Edward Bates, Goodwin paints a clear picture of Lincoln, his political genius to win the 1860 election and put the other three in his cabinet, and his ability to rise above him as a leader by his character. By widening the scope of the book, Goodwin broadens the perspective and compares Lincoln's life to those of his fierce competitors to truly dig into what made him great. Part 2, The Rivals. Abraham Lincoln. A modest man, Lincoln grew up in poverty and suffered many tragic losses of loved ones during his early years, which enforced his melancholy personality. He was much lesser known compared to his rivals, but he was a realist who understood that and toiled steadily in the shadow of looming failure. William Henry Seward. A vivacious man filled with restless energy, Seward was confident to the point of arrogance. He was in the lead as a well-known natural politician who seemed set to nomination. Salmon Chase. A restlessly ambitious man with an austere and disciplined manner, Chase was not as affable as Seward or Lincoln, but he still felt that he deserved the presidency and had virtually no campaign. Edward Bates. A plain and orderly man, Bates was content and increasingly optimistic about the nomination, believing himself to be second, behind Seward. The four men were all eloquent abolitionists who studied law and were part of the Whig, later Republican, Party. The latter three, Seward, Chase, and Bates, were known nationwide, and they, like everyone else, didn't expect Lincoln to block their great ambition. They had a reason not to. Lincoln suffered many political losses. His career was stagnant and far behind those of his rivals. However, Lincoln began to gain some prominence when he debated with Stephen Douglas over the Kansas-Nebraska Act. People were astounded by his eloquence, and Lincoln gained popularity. Prior to the nomination, Lincoln was cautious and careful, while the others were overconfident and reckless, making costly mistakes. His steadiness and focus helped him to narrowly and surprisingly pull through as the victor in the Republican nomination and later the election, which shocked both his rivals and the nation. Newly in office, Lincoln was determined to surround himself with the strongest men, despite their political differences. Why did he do it? Lincoln didn't want a cabinet best suited to serve himself. He wanted a cabinet best suited to serve the country. Lincoln held true to that resolution, placing his rivals in the top spots of the cabinet and balancing it with many Democrats. He forged a strong, diverse, and carefully balanced inner circle, that's a law, made up by his enemies, the Democrats, and his opponents, the rivals, that would help him lead the nation. In the end, though, Lincoln would emerge as strongest of them all. Part 3. Master Among Men. Lincoln took office with a plethora of problems. Several southern states seceded, and the Civil War soon began. In addition, European powers wanted to continue trading with the Confederacy, but were blocked by Union ships. And as if that wasn't enough, power struggles ensued in his own cabinet. His rivals had not recovered from their loss to Lincoln and were asserting their egos. Seward, the new Secretary of State, proudly assumed that he would be the boss. He recommended Lincoln abide by Seward's own suggestions and boldly declared that Lincoln's administration had no domestic or foreign policy. Seward's brash assertion would have certainly deserved his dismissal. However, Lincoln treated him with the generosity that would come to mark all of his reactions to stubborn, rude subordinates. He firmly stated his policy, took up responsibility for it, and did it with such magnanimity that not only kept Seward in the cabinet, but made him one of Lincoln's most loyal and trusted companions. Bates, like Seward, also began to admire and respect Lincoln, overcoming the original feelings of humiliation. However, Chase was an entirely different story. He continued to believe that he, not Lincoln, deserved the presidency and even ran, unsuccessfully, against Lincoln in re-election. Lincoln knew his intentions, but continued to treat Chase with respect and dignity. Later, Lincoln would make him Chief Justice, believing him to be the best person to protect the rights of newly freed black slaves. Lincoln also gave Edwin Stanton, a pro-Chase military mastermind, a position as Secretary of War. Lincoln won Stanton's admiration as he would with many other cabinet members. Throughout his office, Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address, a short speech that changed the way Americans viewed the democratic principles of the Constitution, witnessed the end of the Civil War, a bloody conflict that finally held the Union together, and saw the narrow passage of his hard-fought-for 13th Amendment, a hotly debated bill that banned slavery. Part 4. How did he do it? How did Lincoln accomplish so much during the presidency? How did he turn his once bitter rivals into loyal companions? How did he keep the states truly united after a long, brutal conflict? And how did he free the nation from slavery? Goodwin excels in addressing these questions in her book. She emphasizes on two aspects of Lincoln's leadership ability: his character and intuition. That's a law. Lincoln treated each member of his cabinet with much dignity and respect. He took blame for their faults and gave them his credit. Through these acts of generosity, he was able to keep the loyalty of and maintain a close relationship with each of his cabinet members. By doing this, he was able to balance the bitter factions in his cabinet and drive them towards a common vision. Despite Lincoln's talent, he was a humble man that served the common good rather than himself. He did not forge such a strong cabinet full of his rivals and opponents to serve himself. He did it to serve the country. Lincoln was also able to remain calm and composed despite the harsh criticisms of others. He put grudges behind him and made sure to ask for forgiveness when he offended others. In other words, his heart was greater than his head. Goodwin also emphasizes Lincoln's ability to calculate great, unseen forces and ignore trivial causes. In other words, he was a master of intuition and timing. That's a law. As John Forney said of Lincoln, he always moves in conjunction with propitious circumstances, not waiting to be dragged by the force of events or wasting strength in premature struggles with them. Finally, Lincoln was a man of the people. He didn't just give orders to soldiers from the White House. He focused on connection. That's a law. Lincoln was out on the battlefield encouraging the soldiers after defeat. He wandered around their camps, telling entertaining stories that would be passed around to many others. And he was sitting by them in the hospitals, wishing them well. He inspired devotion among them, and in turn, they helped him defeat General McClellan in his re-election. Part 5. Analysis. In this 944-page book, Goodwin does a good job presenting Lincoln in the light of his rivals and illuminating his character qualities and leadership skills that made him so great. Although this book is a multiple biography, Goodwin places extra emphasis on Lincoln, using his rivals as foils to highlight his qualities. Much of the book consists of a description of history, which average readers may not know, but fellow APA students would be more than familiar with. However, although this book includes a good deal of history, Goodwin accents Lincoln's extraordinary ability or his political genius. Part 6. Legacy. The newly united country deeply mourned Lincoln's assassination. Ironically, the members of his cabinet, once his bitter rivals, felt the most longing. He was now their leader, a father, whom they deeply loved and respected. Nothing could ever fill that space in their hearts, except for the man who had united their talents and settled their differences to lead, preserve, and free the nation.
Wait, that's not all. Hello there. I am Abraham Lincoln, and I would like to tell you a story. I hope that you have learned many lessons from my life by the lives of my early rivals, later some of my most loyal and trusted companions. Many of you may know me as the 16th president. However, I started out as just an average farmer boy from Illinois. I grew up in poverty and faced many tragedies and challenges. My mother and sister died when I was only a child. I once went through a deep depression where I was tempted to commit suicide, but prevented by the fact that nobody would remember me. However, I had a deep ambition that drove me on. Earlier on in my political career, I failed to achieve many of my goals. I ran for offices countless times and continued to fail. Finally, though, I narrowly won the Republican nomination of 1860, and later the election, which is where my story ends and what you know of me begins. So with that said, thank you for your time. Goodbye.